Welcome to Reader Meet Writer Okra Picks, featuring Caroline B. Cooney with her new book, Before She Was Helen. We hope to provide some retail therapy, entertainment, and distraction during this hour. I'm Wanda with the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance. And now to today's writer. Caroline B. Cooney is the author of more than 90 suspense, mystery, and romance novels for teenagers, which have sold over 15 million copies and are published in several languages. The Face on the Milk Carton, published in 1990, has sold over 3 million copies and was made into a television movie. Her books have won many state library awards and are on many book lists, such as the New York Public Library's annual Teen Picks. Caroline grew up in Old Greenwich, Connecticut, and spent most of her life on the shoreline of that state, but is now in South Carolina near her family and me. She has 3 children and 4 grandchildren. Lucky lady. She was a church organist for many years, accompanied the choirs at her children's school, and now plays keyboard for musicals. Caroline, it's all yours.
Hello, friends. I'm so glad you all came. Many years ago, I wrote that book, The Face on the Milk Carton. You might have come across it. Looks like this. And in this story, a young teenage girl will recognize herself on a missing child photograph. She uncovers a series of heartbreaking events that thrust her into a terrible position. She's living under a name not her own and with parents not her own, and she never knew. In the book and in its sequels, Janie doesn't make any of the decisions that throw her around. But I kept thinking, what if you were a grown-up and you decided that you have to live under another name and have another life? What on earth would make you give up your entire family and your background and your history and your school friends and everything you know and run off into a new life and a new name? Think of the loneliness and the anxiety and the danger and the desperation. Why did you do that? Did something horrible happen to you and you have to escape it? Or did you do something horrible and you have to escape it? Or is it both? Suppose that you have pulled this off for 50 years, and you're my age now, you're over 70, and you're kind of slacking off on being careful. The problem is, for whom would I write this story? I write for young adults. My typical reader is a 12-year-old girl. And let me tell you, if I presented a book about a 70-year-old unmarried woman who teaches Latin, my readers would say, yeah, we're leaving. They would say, she's bound to be dead by now anyway. We're not going to read this thing. Well, in fact, YA has changed remarkably since I started. When I started, it was 6th to 9th grade, but somehow the readership has spread in both directions, and now you can have 3rd graders and 50-year-olds reading the same book that junior high kid does. It's a total mystery to me. But I thought, if I write this story of you when you change your name and move into another world entirely as a different person, I have to write it for grown-ups. And that was such an exciting thought. I thought, I'm over 70. Am I going to start a new career? You bet. So I wrote this book. And luckily, I was living in the perfect place to set such a story. We had all been living in Connecticut. My son-in-law was transferred to Charlotte. They bought a house in Fort Mill, South Carolina. And I missed my little grandson so much. And my daughter called me up one day and she said, Mom, I found the coolest place for you to live. It's called Sun City. I had never heard of Sun City. I had no idea there was such a place as an over 55 active adult community. But I figured my life wouldn't change much if I moved there. I'll just plug in my typewriter in a different room and I'll be a South Carolina girl, and best of all, I can get to see my little grandson every day. Well, the first thing you notice when you drive into Sun City is the unnerving similarity of housing. It is literally plain vanilla. The street trees were all planted on the same afternoon, and the two-car garages all face front, and the siding is all the same. And for months, I could only find my own house by pressing the garage door opener in my car to see what door went up. And I'd say, oh, I must live there. And so the next thing you're aware of is the amazing friendliness of people. They have arrived with the express plan of hanging out with new friends and doing new things. Golf, kayaking, horseshoes, pottery, garage bands. The list is incredible. All you do is walk into the room and you're part of it. Nobody cares about your background. They might ask where you're from, but they're going to move on to important things. Can you drive the carpool for the ladies' lunch? Are you free for pinochle? Can you play the piano for the musical? So not only is your house anonymous, so are all your friends. It is very unusual for people to talk about what they did when they worked. They might summarize an entire career by saying, yeah, I was in marketing. Listen, are you trying out for the play? And you find yourself with a raft of friends, but you know about them and they know about you only what each of you chooses to say. So if you want to vanish, you do not need to hide out anywhere in the world. You just go to Sun City and have a good time while you're vanishing, and no one's ever going to know, okay? In other words, you can delete any part of your life you want to delete, or you can add any part of your life. Now, people are very involved with their neighbors. I've never lived anywhere like this. And one common thing is that you have the keys to several houses, because when they're off on a cruise, which is not likely to happen again anytime soon, you are going to have the key to go in and feed the cat or water the plants. And because the houses are so similar, when a light goes on late at night, you know whether they're in the kitchen or in the bathroom. So sometimes there's a little too much information, but believe me, you know what's going on. All this makes Sun City quite a wonderful setting for a mystery. And truly, with 4,000 residents, one of them must have a very shady background. It might as well be you. I decided that your name for the last 50 years is Helen. Helen, you're such a good neighbor. Like other good neighbors here, you routinely check on people who need checking on. For example, if you're old and you live alone, you're worried about falls. You want to be sure that somebody knows if you're unable to get to a phone. So a lot of people get phoned every day. So what if you're this person in your 70s and you are expecting a text from your unpleasant next door neighbor to let you know that he's fine, and he doesn't text? And you call him and he doesn't answer. And you go over to the house and you knock on the door and he doesn't come. And you have a key and you think, okay, I have to go in and check. Please don't be dead. And you open the door and you go in and you find yourself wandering through his little villa because you have to find out if he's okay in there. Well, he's not there, but you find something very interesting and you succumb to voyeurism and you photograph it. Now, people my age love their cell phones. Oh my gosh, first for grandchildren's photographs, but second for Google. It is so much fun. Remember the ancient days when we went to the library and used the Encyclopedia Britannica? Now you just are going to look it up on Google. The cell phone is our best friend, but we, at the same time, may not have any idea what cell phones really do. So you, Helen, you have taken this photograph and you forward it, forgetting that once it's out there, it's public property. Everyone in the world can look at it if it's sent to the right place. And because what you photographed turns out to be stolen, somebody somewhere is going to see that stolen object and notify the police. And unfortunately, you have left your fingerprints in this house where you shouldn't have been. And those fingerprints are going to tell the truth. Who were you before you were Helen? You were somebody else. If it comes out who you really were, are you going to be able to save the person before you were Helen? And are you going to be able to save yourself now that you've done this? Well, I loved writing this. I just finished writing my second mystery for adults, loved every minute of it. Now I'm going to start a third. I am so blessed with my writing, and I'm blessed that I'm a South Carolina girl now. I love South Carolina. I have complete faith that South Carolina will rise to this terrible occasion and come out well at the end of it. And I've got faith in your state. In fact, I have faith in America. We are going to get out from underneath this virus and do things right. And our bookstores and libraries are going to reopen. I don't have to read a digital book again. I can buy a stack of hardcovers and they will have jackets and pages and they'll weigh a ton and I'll have bookmarks. So I'm very excited about all that. I used to have one motto. In fact, my motto was on a vanity plate in Connecticut, BUYBKS. So now I have two mottos, buy books and stay well. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful, wonderful. Well, I just enjoyed this book so much. I cannot tell you, but we're going to give our visitors first crack for questions. It's time for questions, and it's important you stay muted so we can all hear. So in the chat option, please begin all questions with a capital Q. Name your local store if you'd like, and we'll give them a shout out when we ask your question. Linda Marie, do we have a question for Caroline?
We do. A fan of Copperfish Books in Punta Gorda, Florida, says, before moving here, they lived in Hilton Head's Sun City. Are you enjoying your Sun City adventure?
Oh, 100%. In fact, a lot of people here lived in Hilton Head, Sun City. They got worried about hurricanes, so they just shifted Sun Cities.
That's a great idea. That's a funny thing to do, to just shift Sun Cities. Do we have another question, Linda Marie, or can I ask a question? Where are we?
I think you should go ahead and we'll wait for more questions.
Okay. So our young pre-Helen, her name was Clementine, and she went by Clemmy.
Yep.
And so that was an interesting thing you had to do in the book, because she thinks of herself as Clemmy. When she's talking to herself, she calls herself Clemmy, but she's Helen to everyone else. And I was curious where the name Clementine, that's kind of an old-fashioned name, and sort of how that name got chosen as the character's original birth given name.
Wow, well, that's an interesting question. When you've written as many books as I have, you've had a lot of characters. I have an actual shoebox full of index cards listing the names of all my characters. So I'm getting out there now, people. I'm all the way out to Clementine. I loved it after I got started. Well, I can tell you a story if we have time. Clemmy is Helen is a Latin teacher. So why Latin? Well, I loved Latin when I was in high school. I was not that great at it, but I loved it. And if you're my age, or probably within 10 years, you were in a school where they taught Latin, although it's very rare now. And when I was 50, and I said to myself, what have I not done that I've always wanted to do? There were two things. One was I wanted to live in Manhattan for a few years. And the other was I wanted to go back to college and relearn my high school Latin and read Cicero and Julius Caesar and not be a kid. So I made Clemmy a Latin teacher so she could satisfy some of my other career ambitions.
So I see where folks are asking when this book will be published. So originally this book was going to be published now.
This was due out today. I had May 5th circled on my calendar with stars. I told everybody I knew. We were all ready. We were going to get parties. But without bookstores, without all kinds of problems, it was decided to postpone it until September. And I understand the decision. It was still hard. And all the people who pre-ordered it have been very nice about it, because they have to wait a lot of months for it to show up. But
Right.
It's there, and eventually we'll be able to hold it in person.
And it's still available for pre-order if folks want it. They can certainly order it from their bookstore. I also loved, so we had Clementine growing up as a young person and the world she lived in. And you talked about how much had changed for Clementine when you're sort of looking back, Helen sort of looking back on her life. And one of the things that happens without any what are those called? Spoilers,
Uh-huh.
is she has a child out of wedlock, and you talk about wedlock and that whole concept. And I guess I started playing with the word wedlock, which I certainly like. That was when I was a young person. That was the worst thing that could happen to a girl, would be to get pregnant and have a baby out of wedlock. And I've been thinking about the word a lot ever since I finished reading the book, and how that doesn't even seem to be part of the culture today.
No, it totally isn't. And that's why that and so many other things, I had to include a reference to what it was in her childhood, because otherwise there's no understanding Clemmie's decisions, or Helen's either, for that matter.
Right.
And in fact, my middle daughter, the one who lives here, has been my reader since she was in junior high. And back in junior high, she would say things like, "Wow, Mom, that's perfect. Don't change a word." Those days are gone. And now she tells me what to change. And in this one, she said, "All right, Mom, we've got the point. Things are different. Back off a little on some of this stuff."
I loved all the things that you pointed out, the differences. I actually tried to look for, there's a list that used to come out every year, what college graduates weren't around for, like college graduates don't know this or don't know that, but I couldn't find that list. But that's what it made me think about. Linda Marie, can we have some questions from folks? I don't want to take up all the time.
Sure. A school librarian in Raleigh, North Carolina, who's a big fan of Quail Ridge books, writes, "Your mysteries are timeless. I continue to recommend them to the middle schoolers in my library. Why did you begin writing books for young people instead of adults?"
I just fell into it. Thank you for those compliments. I'm thrilled to think that they're timeless. Actually, I think they became overnight historical fiction because, for example, in The Face on the Milk Carton, they use dial phones and they stop at a phone booth. So it's like, I can still read it because in the end, it's the characters that you care about and not the accessories. I just fell into it. I'd had some short stories published in 17 magazine, and this would be a lot of years ago. I mean, this might be 40 years ago. And I received a call from Anne Wright, who was an editor at Scholastic, and they had started a paperback romance line called Wildfire. And she asked if I would turn this 17 magazine short story into a paperback romance for the Wildfire series. And I'm a fast writer. I love to write, and they would take 3 or 4 books a year. So I was on board. It was just a wonderful way to live. And then from there, I just moved into doing other things. Like I wrote a cheerleaders series. They come out once a month, so there are lots of authors. I wrote books 1, 3, 5, 8, and 30. And the reason I stopped writing them is I couldn't think of anything to do with my cheerleaders anymore except drive them off a cliff and kill them. So I had to move on to something else. And then I started writing thrillers and mysteries, and ended up after a while at Random House, which then became Penguin, and doing maybe more sober books that had, they were longer and could deal with other things. But I loved every bit of it. I loved YA. So it's not why I didn't start with adult. It's more why I had the chance to move on to adult, which I shouldn't say move on. I loved YA. I'm not moving on to anything. I just changed careers. I'm just lucky, that's all.
That's wonderful. Do we have another one?
Another viewer asks, how are you, this person is a fan of Malaprop's bookstore in Asheville, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And they ask, how are you able to write all these books? Do you have an assistant?
I do not have an assistant. And I don't know how I'm able to do it. It just pours out. So there are a lot of very prolific writers in the world. And I'm not in the top tier at all. There are other writers who really have written so many more, but I just love doing it. It's easy and I like every minute of it.
That's awesome.
Several, I'm sorry, Wanda.
No, keep going. I was going to ask you if there was a question, so I'm going to turn it over to you. You let me know when you need me back.
Well, several people have asked what authors you enjoy reading.
Well, I'm going to guess that I'm like all of you I see on the screen. I read by the armload. And in the last 6 or 8 weeks, even I have gotten tired of reading. I didn't think that that was a possibility in life, but it is. I read loads of mysteries. That's definitely my favorite fiction. I always have a history book going, but I read that one rather slowly. So right now I'm reading The British Are Coming by Rick Atkinson, which I can definitely recommend. It's almost as good as John Adams by McCullough. But mysteries, I just love them all. I really do read them by the armload. So I can't give you a title.
A big fan of the Bookworm bookstore in Powder Springs, Georgia asks, how hard was it to transition from writing for children to adults?
It was very difficult. Everything from sentence structure to chapter construction to what your character thinks about, to how to move the action along. It's just different for adults. You have a very different pace and method and presentation for kids. And actually, I wrote one book which was not published and never will be, because I guess that was my learning book. I didn't pull it off very well, but I learned a million things from it. So Helen is not my first one in this, but I made it.
Another viewer says or asks, do you keep your story ideas secret when working on a book? And are you ever concerned a similar story has been written about the same topic?
Okay, so the first question is, do I keep it secret? I wouldn't say secret, but I find it very hard to talk about. It may not be formed in my mind. I may not have a grip on my own story. I may feel very tenuous. I'm still working my way toward it. And so I'm really not ready to talk about it. I wouldn't call it a secret, but neither do I talk about it. And what was the other half of the question?
Are you ever concerned a similar story has been written about the same topic?
No, and I'm sure it has, because there are a million billion books out there, and somebody else thought of some of this stuff too. But I'll tell it my way, and I'll be pleased with my story, and I'll be thrilled with how it turned out. I'm thrilled with my publisher, for example. I obviously had to get a new publisher, and my agent brought me to Source Books, and they recently bought Poison Pen Press, so they have this big mystery book brand name, and I forget where I'm going with that, but anyway, Source Books is a great publisher. Oh, it's will someone get it? Yeah, I don't care if someone else is doing it. I'll do it my way, and we'll both be fine.
A fan of Main Street Books in Somerville, South Carolina asks about your writing process. Typically, how long did it take you to write before she was Helen, and what is your writing day like?
It's hard to answer both of those questions, but let me say, how long did it take me to write this actual book? Remember, it's based on my whole life. So I'm drawing from things that I've had in the past that maybe have been milling around in my mind, and I finally have a place for it. So I can't tell you when it began, really. But I would say actual writing time for me is rarely more than 6 months. Now, my writing day is very different now from when I was supporting a family. When I wrote 4 YA books a year and my 3 kids were at home, my writing day was pretty demanding and chaotic, and it was dawn to dusk. But now I'm not retired and very proud to say, I'm never going to retire. I'm just going to keep writing. But I have more command over my time. And I'm sad to say a very early riser. I wish I were not. Insomnia is one of the things that attacks some of us at my age. So I'm up at 4 and I usually write then. I just start and I go till I'm done. There's no way to describe go till you're done, but maybe I've thought, oh, I know what's going to happen in chapter 6, and I write it. Will that take me 2 hours, 6 hours, 10 minutes? I don't know. That's what I thought out. Then during the rest of the day, no matter what I'm doing, and in Sun City, I'm doing something. I learned Mahjong, for example. Doesn't that sound like an old lady? My daughter said, Mom, think about it. Anyway, no matter what I'm doing, I'm thinking about what I'll write the next day. So I mentally have a plan and a thought for the next day's work that I come up with. And I walk 3 or 4 miles a day. For the first time in my life, I have a walking partner. That's never happened. I've always done alone. And during that walk, it's very soothing to me. And I'm usually also, even if I'm chatting with my friend Donna, I'm usually also thinking out what I'm going to write next.
How old were you when you wrote your first book?
We're going back so many years, I'm not sure. I'd have to look up the copyright date. I wrote, this is not a lie, I wrote 8 full-length novels, adult novels, that were never published. I wrote them in my 20s. They were all set in ancient Rome. And you would think that I would have noticed prior to writing 8 of them that nobody wanted these. But I wrote. They were never published, and thank goodness I'm sort of over my ancient Roman historical novel. Need to get it out of my system. And then I wrote books for about 3rd grade, just because I figured that I'd finish it quicker and I'd get rejected quicker. But actually a publisher who doesn't really exist now, although I'm sure the publisher exists in some format, but back then it was Coward, McCann, and Cohagen. And I don't know exactly who absorbed them. Anyway, they bought this mystery for, it's about 3rd graders, called Safe as the Grave. I was living in rural North Carolina at the time. 2 of my kids were born in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And this book was set there along with its sequel. But then something happened. It happens constantly in publishing. The editor left the business, and the editor who replaced her did not wish to do any kids' mysteries. So that was the end of that. And what was the question? Am I answering it?
Was it how old were you when you wrote your first
Oh,
book?
how old was I? Okay, by this time I have kids. I think the first book I had published, I was probably 28 or 30, but I'd actually have to look up the copyright date and subtract my birth date, and then we would know.
Do you think millennials will enjoy this new book since they loved the Janie books when they were teens?
Do I think who would enjoy it?
The millennials, that millennials will enjoy your new book?
Millennials. Everybody's going to enjoy this. They are. It's a timeless idea. The idea that you are under so much pressure you cannot be yourself. And I think there's no one here who hasn't one day thought, I'm just going to get in the car, drive to the horizon. I'm all done here. We all have that go through our minds. And so it's a timeless idea that somebody did it. How did she do it? Well, one reason she could do it is that it is 50 years ago. The kind of ID and public persona on websites and so forth didn't exist then. So it would be much easier to move into another life than it was. But I don't think there's anyone who hasn't had that thought cross a mind. Maybe not in real life, but certainly in reading a mystery where you'd think, yeah, that'd be cool. And I've already given you a hint. You're going to come to Sun City.
At what point in the writing process do you decide on a title?
Well, titles are very problematic, because just because I decide on a title does not mean the publisher wants that title. And titles are really quite a source of conflict, because along with wanting a really cool title, you have to have something called a selling title. You don't want a dud title. Every now and then I pick up a book and it's wonderful, and I think, oh, if you just had a different title, you would be doing so much better. So in fact, the face on the milk carton, I had called The Girl on the Milk Carton. Right away, you can see how much better the editor's choice was, because the face on the milk carton is both neutral and eerie, whereas The Girl on the Milk Carton is just, huh? You know, so usually your editor does a better job, but sometimes you question it. I wrote a book for Scholastic. It was a paperback mystery called Stealing Cop Cars. I thought it was a great title. I mean, who hasn't wanted to steal a cop car? You have, come on, admit it. But Scholastic refused to publish it. So they chose the title Fatality. Okay, it's an okay title, but it's nothing to write home about. In other words, I don't get to choose my titles all the time.
And how do you start out with the main topic of a book? Is it a circle with a bunch of questions along the way?
I'm not sure what that would mean. So I'll say that when I have an idea, I just leap in. For example, I'm quite fascinated by, although I don't want to do it myself, the genealogy decisions people are making and the testing of DNA to find family members. It clearly turns up some things that are unexpected and maybe very dark. And I'm surrounded by people who have suddenly gotten into this because they're now thinking, yeah, it's now or never. I have to find out because I'm getting older. And I can't help thinking in some cases that it would be better not to pursue some of these things. So I don't have a plot, but this is swirling around in my mind. Can I write about this? So I have maybe 10 things like that. Will this go somewhere? Can I use it? And then after a bit, I'll just start typing. I just begin. I just throw out sentences and paragraphs. They don't have to have anything to do with each other. There doesn't have to be any chronology. You just go for it. You set down anything that might possibly apply to anything and keep churning along. And then one day you'll have something. Or I do.
That is fascinating. That is fascinating. We have time for one more question, or I will talk to Caroline about all the things I thought about when I read the book. Do we have one more?
We do have someone who's a fan of Ernest and Hadley books. They wonder, where are you from in Connecticut?
I grew up in Old Greenwich and I raised the children in Westbrook, but I've also lived in East Haddam and Madison. Where is he from? Oh, you don't have a way to know that.
I don't know.
We don't know.
Maybe they'll tell us. They're from Greenwich.
Oh, from Greenwich.
Old Greenwich, yeah.
Well, they're just from Greenwich.
Oh, they're from Greenwich?
Yes.
Well, tricky question. When did they graduate from Greenwich High?
Ah.
Well,
Answer.
Class of 65.
Oh, I'm from Greenwich, the poor side. 1974 is what they said.
Oh, they're but a child. Ask them who they had for American history at Greenwich High.
Who taught?
Who
Yeah.
taught? Who did they have for American history at Greenwich High? Could have been my mother.
That's right. We'll see if they answer.
I believe this is the owner of Ernest and Hadley books.
Yeah, and they might not be able to remember their teacher. Oh,
Well,
I
make
don't
it up.
remember.
She was wonderful.
Yeah. What was her name?
It's always room for fiction in the world, people.
That's right. What was her name?
Martha Bruce.
Martha Bruce. There's a Bruce family in Greenville, South Carolina, that owned the bookstore there for years. That's not there anymore, but they did. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I don't know them.
I'm impressed you remember that. Well, we're all very impressed with you, Caroline, and the book was just wonderful. I want you to know
Thank you.
I thoroughly enjoyed myself.
Thank you. And you guys are all going to write to me, right? That's what I heard. I heard that you write in and I write back to you.
Right. We're going to send you all the questions. If we have any questions that didn't get answered, we're going to send them to you and you're going to write answers. And then we're going to send them to all the bookstores who participated, and it will run in our Lady Banks newsletter.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you, everyone. This was wonderful. And if you enjoyed it as much as I did, let your bookstore know. Order the book from them. We hope to be scheduling scores of authors, so please be in touch with your bookstore with any suggestion or ideas for how this could have been better for you, and pre-order Before She Was Helen from them. Thanks, Caroline, Linda Marie, and Nikki. This is Wanda signing off. Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye. Have a great day.